Welcome to another edition of Unlocking Astrology with the one and only Samuel Reynolds. Hashtag Unlock Astrology. That's his actual business, unlockastrology.com. So we just did Gemini. And it's interesting in the comments, there were a few people like, thank you because my sign is the most hated sign. But I think it's the most hated sign now, primarily because of Trump and Kanye. But so they were grateful that you are even-handed and fair and giving the positive. So I want to thank you for that. I was even thinking about, uh, a lot of us look at ourselves through the negative attributes of our
Yeah.
sign. We talked about this before, but you are given such a broader perspective and also reminding us we all embody every single sign. So as we navigate through. Before we get into Cancer, I wanted to ask you what attributes to, because I remember you saying as a Scorpio, you never felt like a Scorpio based on the attributes. What attributes to the, speaking of Gemini, the polar way in which some people show up? Like, for example, most people think of the bull as, I'm Taurus and I'm coming, but I know a lot of Taurians that are laid back, passive, weak, and it's shocking to me, even on the basketball court, you have like a Tim Duncan who's real quiet and sa sway, and then a Kevin Garnett who's like, not that Tim Duncan's weak, he's one of the greatest players of all time, but
Hmm.
just very subtle. What accounts for the different ways? Because all of these signs have these forward attributes, but within the people, I noticed that they can be completely opposite than what you think.
Well, one is one's individual makeup that's based on your chart. So your rising sign, that will contribute to it, your moon sign. And then if you're, because we're mainly talking about sun signs here, it may be challenges or even things related to your sun that mitigate it. So, for instance, if you're born with a Sun Jupiter conjunction, right? And Jupiter is much more grandiose, exuberant, enthusiastic, outgoing, and you happen to have that, let's say, um, in Taurus, right? Then you might be a lot more sociable, outgoing, generous Taurus, right? People often associate miserliness somewhat with Taurus as well. So it's like, you don't seem like a Taurus at all. Like blah, blah. And it's because they're really seeing more of the Sun Jupiter. Contacts between planets can scream louder than just the sign they're in. So I think that's one mitigating factor. So, for instance, with me, I don't seem like a Scorpio because my sun was or is in the part of the chart we call the ninth house, which is a lot more, it seems Sagittarian like to people, outgoing, sociable, traveling, worldly. I won't, well, yeah, somewhat talkative. I also have Jupiter is very prominent in my chart. So Jupiter is the ruler of Sagittarius. So because Jupiter is prominent and it colors some measure of my sun in Scorpio, people see that Jupiter and like, nah, you're really a Sag, right? But my sun is in Scorpio. So there can be mitigating factors in someone's chart. The other thing, going back to the broader sweep of it, is because we've gotten more into sinology thanks to memes. So as you said, some people focus more on the negative or just the limited understanding they have of a sign rather than thinking about the philosophy, the idea behind the sign, and then what other people might demonstrate. Like the person who decided to block me on Twitter because he's like, there's no such thing as a shy Leo, right?
So he
Like,
blocked where he blocked you.
yeah, he got in his feelings.
Yeah.
Right. I
Mhm.
mean, people on Twitter are funny. I mean,
Yeah.
it was, as I was hilarious. I was just like, you're gonna be upset because all right, that's fine.
Yeah, I know I know a shy Leo. So
Hmm.
that's weird. And Jupiter must be in my, I don't know what my other signs are or moons or whatever. Did you do my chart?
I did your chart,
Oh,
but I'm
do I
gonna
have
tell you
Jupiter?
something.
I don't have any
I
Jupiter
No,
because
no,
I'm
no,
not
no.
miserly.
Let me tell you. It's interesting. Either I took the heart that you wanted it private, or your ancestors looked out and was like, not until she's ready. So I couldn't find it. It's not in my database. I have other people's charts, but yours is
Wow.
gone.
Look at that. Thank you, ancestors.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
until you're like, so
Not
yeah, I
ready.
looked for it as I was getting back on the show, and I was like, all right, let me look at where is it? And I looked for it, on that computer I was using. Others, it's not there.
Wow. Yeah, I'm something's going on. I just will
Yeah.
say that.
So,
So it's weird, right? Because
mhm.
spiritually, I believe in otherworldly things. You know, I believe that there are divine interventions, not necessarily that God comes down and does something, but I do believe in awakening the angels in your life. I do believe that there's a battle going on spiritually that we can't see. But I don't want my chart read. So
No, no.
I don't
Remember,
want
that's my story, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's. I mean,
I
I
don't.
hated astrology, but I was friendly to numerology, tarot, every other kind of, not
Oh,
every other, but most
yeah,
other
I'm
things.
not doing any of that. Right.
But astrology, I was like, yeah. So it became my thing.
All right. Let's do the cancers who I seem to have a wicked affinity towards for some reason.
Well, that's interesting because the moon is the sign that rules, or we could say unlocks Cancer, the gatekeeper, the doorkeeper for Cancer. And the moon has one other place that feels like home to her, like a home away from home, and that is dun, 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 Taurus, right? So she's exalted in Taurus.
Oh,
So there's an affinity that Cancer will have to Taurus. We say they have a sextile. They both are quote unquote receptive. Some will call that feminine, right? So there's a way in which they can experience comfort because Cancer is a sign that is driven toward achieving more nurturing, comfort, and caretaking, right? And the caretaking is dealing with the aspect of security, both in terms of giving security, getting security, also dealing with comfort, how we kind of settle into, being in our bodies again, rather than just being in our heads, and kind of living with the body in relation to our emotions, to what comfort us, what protects us, what keeps us safe. So there's a draw. So Taurus, because I remember you said that you were with a Cancer when you were younger in life, right? It may have been at a particular point in your life, you may have wanted to either deal with a caretaker or feel like you needed to take care of somebody
yeah,
else.
I was the caretaker.
Right, right. That we should talk about Cancer men because I have a special um way in which I talk about Cancer men because maybe I'll start with that because it's different. Um, and we'll get to this also when we talk to Libra, um, because the pressures of how we deal with men in our society because of
Hmm.
patriarchy, they form differently for people of different signs than others. So Cancer is one of those signs where you also can run into the issue. Whenever a Cancer client, especially a woman, comes up to me that who's het normative, comes to me and say like, I have a man, he's a Cancer, blah blah blah, or I should say just a client in general, say I have a Cancer man. The first question I always ask, where's his mama, right? I ask, where's his mama? Because even if she's not in this world, even if he is somewhat estranged from her, I mean, literally estranged from her, she is going to prefigure largely in his life in some significant way,
Facts.
right?
Yep.
And why that's powerful, because remember what I said, the moon is the sign, the planet that rules Cancer. And by virtue of that being the moon, representative of the prime nurturer, the mother, the materializer, right? Um, there's going to be a certain attachment to that, or attachment to the mother for usually for a Cancer man. And that can be challenging for a couple different ways, in a couple different ways. One particular way in which it can be challenging is then it can become an attachment, inordinate attachment to family and to the sense of one's people, right? One example of that is we can mention George W. Bush, who's a Cancer, which I always found pretty fascinating. By the way, he also has, um, somewhat in his chart, there's some ways in which Sirius also kind of, we were talking about Sirius earlier, ties in. And Sirius is in Cancer, right? It's a star that's nearest to that constellation, nearest to that sign, I should say. Anyway, what I always found fascinating about him, and this reveals some measure of the Cancerian nature of this country. right? Because we honor the birth of this country on July 4th, 1776, when the sun was in Cancer. But going back to George Bush, when he was asked, why are we going to Iraq, right? Other than the pretense of weapons of mass destruction, dude said, Saddam tried to kill my daddy, right? Which I was like, cancer, right? This is personal, right? Like, I mean, I couldn't believe that he said it out loud, and I'm like, oh, this is really personal, and that is often what can also happen with with cancer. Things are very personal for them. Remember, I told you that each sign is the answer to the one preceding it. So Jim and I became this dialogue between the heart and mind, which is trying to divorce oneself from the quote unquote personal. Whereas cancer's like, yeah, let's bring it back because that was crazy, right? And you sounded crazy, kind of going like between these different things. Let's start with the here and now, and this baby needs food, and this needs to happen. We have all these ways in which we have to take care of the people in our society, which or in our culture and our family, right? Like I'm gonna pick on my girl Laree. Laree's a cancer, right? It's not a big surprise that she has committed her life in terms of the service to her people,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know,
Laurie Daniel Favors for those.
thank you.
Yes. Got
Another person we might mention who I believe is also a cancer. People are gonna hate him or love him, especially during this particular time of year, Maulana Karenga, right?
Yeah.
So
Kwanzaa, the
yeah,
Kwanzaa founder. Yes.
yes, yeah. Kawaida, in terms of us, all these other things associated with them. Also a certain commitment to people. So, and then, this nation is a cancer nation, right? So what are some of the elements related to this, to the idea of cancer? Well, one is, like I mentioned, comfort, in terms of enjoying some aspects related to, how we have things, food, kind of in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the base levels of it, in terms of food, water, shelter. These are the things. So, and I also think of New York. Many people look at New York, even though it was founded as a, five boroughs during Capricorn. It's kind of a cancer city because I have to laugh because we have a woman in the harbor who says, give me, you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, yearning to be free, right? That's also cancer, right? People coming home or finding a sense of home and domesticity in the sense of that. So the one thing that people attribute to cancer, which I don't think is fair, because I always like to talk about the things I think are unfair, that they're always emotional. That's not always true, right? So cancer, remember what the crab is, right? I mean, cancer is the crab. That's literally the word, right? You might say like, it's also a disease. That's true. But the Greeks also assigned the disease because it had the same attributes as a crab, moving sideways in the body and being hard, right? That
Mm.
was the significance for it. So, because the crab moves sideways. So we think about the motion of a crab moving sideways, and then you have some sense of understanding how cancers, sun and cancers, moon and cancers, cancer risings may move. They may not always be direct. That's not always just passive aggressiveness, but also might be shielding their emotions. So they're not they're going to share their emotions with the people they value, who make them feel comfortable, who you know they kind of they love or whatever, feel connected to. But they may actually demonstrate more of a wall or kind of greet you more with their intellect first. So for instance, Robin Williams, cancer, right? We were dazzled by his brilliance, by his speed, his quick like the moon, blah 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 blah. But the man obviously was tortured inside throughout his life. It wasn't just as he was facing that disease, but also in terms of things that roiled in him. So sometimes cancers can't help but express some measure of their emotions, even unintentionally. So it's not just about an emotional reaction to you. Like they, many of them don't always have solid poker faces, even though they may not be sharing their emotions about you or the thing that's happening. One of the things I love to kind of that show or demonstrate is that you kind of go to greet your cancer friend, and they kind of like, make a face as you're approaching. And you're like, what? Something, you don't want to see me? No, no, my bra's too tight, right? So it's not about you.
You.
it's sometimes about what's roiling within them and the things that they're dealing with and other problems that they're having. But they are dealing with their emotions, and often cancers, because they're doing the work related to their emotions, they often have high emotional intelligence. So even though they, you know, they figure out some things, that doesn't mean then that they're not still roiled by them. Um, so I think this emotionalism that people attribute, like they're going to cry at the drop of a hat, it depends on where you catch that cancer. You know, if they're at a party and people are laughing at them or something has happened, you know, they may laugh it off or blah blah blah, and then come home and cry about it. And like, this is the worst thing, blah blah blah. So the because they have to have that heart and shell. Similarly, look at this country.
Just
Let me just say this last point, and I want to definitely get into that. So this country, I think, in a lot of ways, really relays that, in terms of its high emotionalism. It's triggered by nearly everything. It's built up perhaps one of the, if not the most militarized um, country in the world, right? In terms of having bases all over the world, and it's separated by two oceans. Like, why do you need that level of nuclear weapons and a military where you have like two oceans that separate you from almost anyone that can invade you? That can be the protective nature of cancer. It's again going back to Bush. He developed, the Department of Homeland Security, right? Which again is another laughable thing related to cancer. There's some ways in which they can be overprotective of themselves, of others, rather than trusting that they can greet the world and take care of the world. They're like their polarity, Capricorn. Both are concerned with responsibility and taking care of things, but from a different order. But anyway, you were about to ask a question.
no, I'm just, my experience is that cancers, I call it duplicity, but they
Hmm.
hold on to things, right? So, you could have an argument today, maybe 3 years from now, that thing will come back, and you're like, I thought we settled that.
Yeah, because it's a sign of water. So there's something significant I probably should have started off with, because I mean we're just flowing. But Cancer is now the next round of cardinal signs that begin. In tropical astrology, it begins seasons. So Cancer is the beginning of summer, and so it starts off summer. So it's an initiating sign. And people say like, but they always seem so laid back. Well, they're a receptive sign. They're a water sign. They're not like Aries. So they're going to respond quickly when threatened. Like one of the stories I love to tell, most recently we saw is, we know the story of that man who was jogging or running through a Utah park recently, or reserve, nature reserve or preserve, and he was being chased by a cougar, right? So that was the story that broke, and like, oh, but the part that didn't get reported until maybe the next day is that cougar was escorting him away from her babies,
That's right.
right? That's Cancer. Kind of like, listen, you threaten mine, you're gonna have, it's mama bear, you're gonna have problems. So it does have some measure of that initiatory sensibility, but it responds. The other part of that, it's a water sign. So just think about the nature of water. Water, one thing that water does, it, yes, it flows, it changes, it's changeable, right? But it also preserves. So you're like, oh, that sounds cool. So it remembers, right? So Marcel Proust, right, who wrote Of Things Remembered Past, right? This voluminous book on things that happened to him in his life. He was a Cancer, right? So um, you know, a book that I know you published, Black Lotus, right, by Sylvia Abrams. In terms, when I read that and I looked at, the details she remembered, and I'm like, I didn't remember all this stuff. Cancer, right? So the positive aspects of Cancer is the long memory, but the problem that can happen when you have a long memory, an ironclad memory, is then that it's hard for you to forget and hard for you to forgive,
Mm.
right? Because the memories are always living out for you, right? They're always there. They're always kind of surfacing more.
we're gonna
Um,
we're gonna get into relationships at another round, But if you're in a relationship with somebody who never forgets and may never forgive, how do you navigate that?
Short answer, I don't know, right? Um, because then that doesn't really allow for a full relationship, right? Um, I
So that
think,
cancer has to be, and I say this about everyone, whatever your proclivities are, whatever your sign says personality wise, it's up to you to do the work to undo, like, Taurians are stubborn. So I'm as flexible as I possibly, I'm mindful, and I
right.
direct people, please challenge me, because I don't want to be so rigid that I break. I need to be able to bend. I know that that's a flaw. I know that I overindulge. Like, I have, so I have to put in accountability folk in my life to make sure that I'm not overindulging, especially in food, because I love it. But so
So do
like,
they,
so hey,
cancers.
who doesn't love good? Oh yes, they do. So people have to work on the things that they know. So if you know that you are unforgiving, then perhaps that is a to go seek a fix for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, that part of caretaking is being able to also let go, um, and that it doesn't reflect on you as a bad person. You know, going back to what I was talking about, um, with cancer men, it's also making allowance for how you build family rather than just being beholden to your family. One of the things to know about cancer, remember the sign that comes after cancer is Leo, because you can become so attentive and bonded to a collective or a group that you don't necessarily mature as an individual, right? Which is the next step with Leo. It's kind of when you kind of the real throne for Leo. I'm skipping ahead, but the real throne for Leo is a dimension of self, right? To
Mm.
rule self, not necessarily to rule others. But what happens with Cancer, the preceding sign, is that there can be such a conception tied into, the idea of the collective, of the mother, of home, all these other things, that you don't fully become your own person. This often can also become the son, the daughter that never leaves home, and then resents, the child that does, the sibling that does, right? Like, I'm holding the fort for what? Well, I
Fly,
mean, doesn't mean
Robert.
it's not. It doesn't have importance. It can, but why are you holding the fort? Did you hold the fort because that you felt that in your heart, or you felt that that was the thing that you had to do? So it's good for cancers in terms of cultivating that emotional intelligence, which relates to also an intellectual intelligence. Why are you doing the things that you're doing rather than just doing them because, like, you should, or because that's what family is about, and that's what this nation is about? One of the challenges for America is that it prides itself on a nation before it really has taken stock and appreciation for its citizens, and that's
Mm.
always been true.
And she hasn't matured.
No,
She's still a petulant child.
but true to form, related to the moon, prodigious, right? She
Mm.
was a prodigious child,
Yes.
who was able to do things that many in the world had not done, but it doesn't fully understand the nature of its value, of what it has to take care of.
Robin Williams, George W. Bush. Give us some cancers. I like
Lena,
Robin Williams. Give us some. Oh, Neo.
no,
Oh,
Lena
some
Horne,
no. Lena Horne. Okay.
yeah,
Like,
Lena Horne.
give us some black cancers that famous.
Well,
Lena Horne.
there is one, uh, Bill Cosby.
So.
Yeah, so we had, that with him, as and,
Wait.
acknowledging.
So let's pause for a second, because I
Let's
think,
go.
history should paint people as complicated. If there's a
That's
Roman,
correct. Right.
there's a Roman Polanski who I actually is, I put in
Leo.
a different category, and a Woody Allen who I put in a different category, and they're still celebrated, Oscar award winning, still
Absolutely. You're right.
looked upon. Bill Cosby contributed to maybe two generations of greatness.
So here's,
Both,
yeah.
so I'm not gonna, and we're not even talking about Fat Albert. We're talking about the Cosby Show in a different world, bringing in Alvin Poussaint, making sure that there was jazz and art and culture and every, uplifting Black people at every turn. At the
So,
same time, he was a molester or a
right,
person that,
a
took
rapist.
advantage of
Yeah.
women. Yes.
Um, so let's talk about Bill Cosby for a second related to that. I mean, like, what was he known as? America's dad,
Father. Yeah.
right? So, and the thing that he s- talked about, and then I think largely expressed to be most passionate about, were children and to take care of them and to be mindful related to them. Um, I would say David Allen Greer is another
Mm.
notable Black cancer,
Black cancer.
right? Um, but one thing that's interesting about these cancer is that I think in many ways they make formidable actors, um, in terms of like the moon, what we project onto them.
Mm.
That's true with Bill Cosby. For those who aren't familiar with Lena Horne, this was true for Lena Horne and what we foisted on her, in terms of the malleability that she had. Perhaps, one of the hardest working actors, and changeable actors is Tom Hanks, cancer.
Oh,
Meryl Streep, cancer.
wow. Wow.
Forrest Whitaker. Now, Forrest Whitaker, especially just seeing him, in Jingle Jangle,
Oh my God. That was
on
good.
Netflix.
Yes.
You saw it?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I,
Um,
I'm rooting for everything that's Black, just so you know.
right. Yeah, me too. Seeing him, there, you think about his career going from The Crying Game. I mean, it didn't start with that, to The
Right.
Way of the Samurai, but all these things, you know, he has, you know, a face, that it is, you know, malleable, seems sad, blah, 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 whatever, but he's been a working actor, like, for 30 years. He has this ability to take on, these different dimensions of being. Same thing was true for, Robin Williams. I'm not denying his ability. There's a certain malleability, a way to kind of absorb, our projections and then at the same time transmute them and project them out that I see in
Because
Cancer.
water is not blue, right?
Right.
It's a
Water is
reflection.
not blue.
Yeah.
That's a great phrase. I like that. Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Water is not blue.
It's what I do. All right. It's what I do. All right.
Right. And then
Um,
also last thing, I mean,
yeah.
what's funny, thinking about Lena Horne, if anyone has seen The Wiz, which I hope all of y'all have seen The Wiz, right? What does she get the Aries to do, Diana Ross, in the movie at least? Is get her to sing home, right? So,
Wow. Wow. Do you think they, and let me ask you this, because we are talking before we got on this, there's like divine, and I should change my name from Professor Hunter. This is the space that I use when I teach. So y'all can just get with that. Do you think that there's like a divine order to things? Like, I don't think a director or a producer sitting there saying, we're going to make Lena Horne the witch that brings it all home because cancers, it's like, is it a coincidence or is there an energy that spiritually is tapped into when these things are put together?
um, I could say the short answer, divine, but the longer answer, I might say, because you know, my partner and I, we look at films and we look up actors who play them. You know, there are um, actors will play out their charts often, and so they will manifest in a particular way. Like I'm blanking on the name, but Harry Potter is a Leo,
Oh,
but
Daniel
Daniel
Radcliffe.
Radcliffe,
Hmm.
yeah, Daniel Radcliffe is also a Leo, right? Now it's not always the same sun sign. There's some dimensions that you may see where they play out particular characters because that's who they are, right?
Mm.
Um, and they'll, actors are always lending parts of themselves and discovering different parts of themselves to kind of then put into the character, you know. Um, So, for instance, one interesting character, I talked about Gemini last time, and I talked about Arthur Conan Doyle's creation, Sherlock Holmes. So one of the more popular um, Sherlock Holmes has been Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes,
Yep.
who Benedict is a Cancer, right? So he played him in a very Cancerian way, right? Like sidestepping more scenes. A lot of the scenes were set at home, um, and he was very emotional. But again, playing that Cancer game, I'm not going to let you see my emotions. He had the shell up. Whereas you look at, just to give you a different contrast, you look at Elementary's Sherlock Holmes, um, and he's a Scorpio, right, with a moon in Pisces, and I'm blanking on his name. Um, but if y'all remember him, you'll say it. But he plays a different kind of Sherlock Holmes. Much more aggressive, edgier. You know, much more into like you know, in a different sensibility. Has an addiction, a strong. I mean, they play more on the addiction issue in that Elementary. So John
Jonathan Lee Miller.
Johnny Lee Miller, thank you.
Yes.
So yeah, you can play these characters in different ways, but it's going to really be hooked into your chart, and it does depend on the bandwidth of the actor. And I do find that it's interesting. Some of our most notable actors, or even steadily working actors who we project so much on, are Cancers. Tom Cruise, Running Man. Now I have to look at his chart again and figure out, why is that man running in every film? But he has had a span to his career, you know, and malleability related to that.
And he's an Oscar winning kingmaker, meaning
Hmm.
people who act against him or with him usually come away with the
Hmm.
accolades, and that's part of that nurturing thing. Give me three great things about Cancers as we close this out. The three greatest attributes.
Their emotional intelligence, um, the 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 willing, and then related to that emotional intelligence is a pursuit toward emotional truth. Their respect for the idea of home, and wanting to make a sense of home. Um, and then what's useful, especially when you want to kind of dive into, walk along memory lane, their ability to remember things. My Moon and Cancer friend will surface things I have long forgotten. You remember that person, blah, 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 in Bed-Stuy, you used to do this? Like, no. But yeah, this is, oh, right? Or if you want to remember a particular detail, call up a Cancer. No, you were wearing a blue dress, right? Oh, okay. So I think that's also something I enjoy about them.
Good to know, because my memory sucks. So that's probably why I keep a bunch of Cancers around me.
Hmm.
But it's not my fault though. They are drawn, literally drawn. Like I'm not seeking.
Well, yeah, I mean that's another thing too that we'll just round up. You know, you know. Speaking of mysteries, you're right. They're drawn to you, but at the same time, you may be indirectly, unconsciously drawing them. Like, so for me, I don't go looking for Sagittarians. They find me, right? They keep finding me, right? Or Sag influence people. And at one particular point, they were not my favorite sign. They were my least favorite sign, right? But the more that I came to make peace with what was the least favorite thing about them, and the more that they came into my orbit, the more I, didn't mind that. And that was okay. Also, it comes in cycles. There's going to be like Leos, who start to come, or Aquarians,
So it's
so.
really about you and maybe something that you need that you're drawing to
Mhm.
yourself, but also maybe the reflection is for you to also, it comes back to you figuring out the things you need to be better at or
That's
do
correct.
better. So I'm gonna take that. I wrote down these notes. So thank you.
Alhamdulillah.
All right. Listen, I appreciate you. Thank you. Next up, we're going to talk about Leo,
Leo.
the lion. Yes, let's talk about that. Thank you, Sam. And folks, you can follow him at SF Reynolds on Twitter, also unlockastrology.com. I'm going to put it all in the description. Hit the like button. Definitely follow him as well. And I thank you for being here today.
Thank you.